Just so we've got it. Okay, brilliant. Hi, Mandla, Tony, and Ti. I see you guys have hopped on as well. Okay, so welcome everyone. It's nice to see all of you again. As most of you already know, my name is Nicole and I am the community manager at Linum Labs. Linum Labs is a software development studio focused on blockchain-based products in identity and health, with Molecule Catalyst being our focus at the moment. The project is coming along quite nicely. I'll share some quick updates in the chat channel after the presentations, and also just send over the link to our previous call on meetup.com actually in the next few days. So keep an eye out for that. But just for context, we host the blockchain community calls to engage our global community of blockchain enthusiasts as well as developers, with thought leaders and exciting projects in the space. So we really enjoy covering these complex systems or just terminologies that people hear about and it sounds sexy and fluffy. But this is a place where we can ask all of the questions that we have, but then also engage with some real life use cases and learn from our community. So I will give our speakers the opportunity to introduce themselves in a moment, but briefly I'll go over the agenda for this evening. This month we have Flavia, who is trained as a data privacy lawyer and is actually from Romania but joins us from Rome, so very jealous about that. Flavia will be demystifying self-sovereign identity and then evaluating the legal factors. So quite exciting. We also hear from Elizabeth, who is the communication strategist at Jolocom. So this month, she will be participating in our project highlight segment and present Jolocom as a real-world use case, and also delve deeper into how self-sovereign identity is implemented. But before we start, just some house rules. I just wanted to please ask you to mute your mics while the speakers are presenting. It just helps to minimize any feedback or distractions while the presenters are in session. And then for the folks who haven't joined us before, this call is recorded and can be referred to as a resource on our YouTube channel. So even if you go on now, you'll see the community calls we've done in the past. So yeah, it's just a nice to have. And then, lastly, but super important, please ask your questions in the chat box for the Q&A towards the end. So you would have seen some people introducing themselves. Feel free to ask your questions while the speakers are presenting. Once both Flavia and Elizabeth have presented, I will call out your name and give you the opportunity to read out or ask your question if it's changed, and you will hear from our speakers. So yeah, that's all from me. Feel free to DM me as well if you're having any trouble with audio, because I know it gets quite spotty sometimes. But yeah, without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to Flavia. Flavia, the floor is yours.
Hi Nicole, hi everyone. Thanks for the intro. I'm Flavia. I was trained as a data privacy lawyer, but recently I am interested in new technologies like blockchain and how do we apply existing regulation to this new innovative concepts. I will share now my presentation with you. Just a second, okay. Oh, sorry. Yes, so today I will try to explain a little bit on a higher level and without entering in any of technical details what is self-sovereign identity, how did we think about self-sovereign identity, what problems did we want to solve, and explain a little bit about the legal implications, especially from a privacy legal point of view. What are the issues and advantages of self-sovereign identity? We are familiar with a centralized identity management. Everybody in this call today has a different username and passwords in interacting with websites and with service providers all over the web. As you can see, this is how we are used to thinking about identity. There are these service providers that keep all this data centralized about us. Our identities are fragmented all over the web. We don't know what's happening behind the curtains. We don't know who that data is shared with. We don't have a way of really controlling what data they collect about us. And maybe these are all problems you are familiar with because privacy is such a big subject nowadays, and there were lots of scandals around this centralized way of collecting data and how this has led to an abuse of power in the hands of big service providers. There are lots of things that are a negative in thinking about identity in this way. I talked about having your identities fragmented, and that leads to a security issue. Also, from a security point of view, you don't get to authenticate if you're really interacting with Facebook or with the New York Times webpage. They authenticate you, but you have to trust a more traditional hierarchy on the internet in forms of the trust we know now of website domains and all this trust framework we have now. But in general, it's just a poor user experience, and that also extends to the model that came next. We're familiar with social logins. You have this set of username and password, and you use them across several service providers. That solves much of the user experience problem, but the rest of the considerations, the rest of the negative aspects still remain, just as if you were talking about the first model of identity. Well, we have blockchain now, and we thought about how do we use this technology in a way that will help us develop a better identity management system. So maybe before explaining the basic stuff about self-sovereign identity, my question, and it's still not answered, is what is identity? We don't know how to define it. We don't have a definition for it. Is it our national ID? Is it our social security number? When thinking about digital identity, is it our username or password, or is it our entire profile that Facebook or Google have on us, or the ad publishers? We don't know how to define this, and I will touch base on this. I will circle back to this idea of the definition of identity a little bit later, because it's really important going forward to decide what we consider identity to be. Now, just a quick description of self-sovereign identity. We have no consensus on the definition, but we can define self-sovereign identity by responding to the question, how does it work? Well, you can see that it puts the user back in control of his data, of her, or his or her data. The user stands at the center of the data ecosystem, and he is in full control over who to interact with, when, for how long, and how to share that data in a way that is completely decentralized. And this is this is a decentralized solution that will be essential for the development of Web3, because we will need identity layer from now on, and we will need an identity layer that is suitable for the trustless environment we are trying to create. So in practice, we classify the actors in this model. You are an identity owner, and you interact with issuers and verifiers. You have a digital wallet, just as a physical wallet, but it's maybe on your phone. And in this wallet, you store things about you called credentials. For example, you can store your phone number, your address, the fact that you have a diploma, and many other credentials. And these are either you self-issue them, so it's something you say about you as an identity owner, or it's a credential that is issued by someone else, by an issuer. And when you interact with service providers or organizations or other identity owners, you present these claims, and the verifier actually verifies the credential that it is issued by the issuer. It said it is. And this is constructed on a public key infrastructure. And we need the blockchain because we need to have a secure, auditable way to share this cryptographic keys. Let's just imagine a little bit one interaction. For example, you want to interact with an employer, and you present your you have a digital wallet, and the employer wants to make sure that you have a bachelor in computer science. So the employer doesn't want to call the university and make sure, well, does the John have a computer science diploma? So you present the credential on your wallet to the employer, and the employer acts as a verifier, and he can check that actually the university has issued this credential to you, that you are a bachelor of computer science. You need to understand that these credentials are just as trusted as the issuer, because the employer may ask you for your phone number, and this phone number can be a self-issued credential, because I can trust you that you will give the right telephone number, but I can't trust you to prove that you have a diploma. So this is a very simplified version of SSI. There are lots of other details, and maybe Elizabeth will talk about many of the advantages that come with this model. For example, if you want to prove to someone you are over 18, you don't have to actually disclose your full your actual age. You just have to present a credential, and they have to it's sufficient for them to know from this special kind of proof that you're over 18 without actually know your age. Now, this is kind of the same diagram. I've put it here for two reasons. One, because you can see better how this ecosystem works and how everybody interacts. Credential request, and then you present it to different verifiers. But if you check, it mentions Asaph Blockchain, and it stands for the European Self-Sovereign Identity Framework Blockchain. And this is really important because um, this is a European Union initiative to actually use self-sovereign identity for virtually every public service the European Union provides. So this is maybe the proof that self-sovereign identity will mean a big thing for us in the near future. Also, to circle back to the idea of how we define identity, please observe that in this diagram, how the European framework is thinking about applying this, and you will see all sorts of official state authority credentials like diplomas and national IDs. So I think at first this will be the adoption of self-sovereign identity with official state-sponsored ID. That is not a bad thing, but we should be careful moving forward from this base. Now, maybe some of you know GDPR, what it's about. I'm sure most of you have heard about it. There are lots of other privacy regulations out there, not only GDPR, there's also e-privacy, but we don't have time to get into that. Essentially, GDPR is the main legislation in the European Union that concerns with how do we protect people in regards to their personal data. And it's this huge regulation that really details everything from who is who, classifies all the actors in the ecosystem, and it's really prescriptive. It has lots of responsibility allocation, and it tells you who does what. And here in the right, you can see that GDPR classifies all actors as either data controllers, data subjects, and data processor. The best way to imagine this is, for example, Google is a data controller, and you are a data subject, and because in relation to the services you use, the search engine, Google determines the means and processing of your personal data, meaning they decide what to collect about you, what manner, how to communicate your rights, and lots of different obligations that they have. This is a very important law, GDPR, because it really extended what we mean when we say personal data. Because personal data, traditionally, we think about names or addresses or social IDs, but actually, as you can see from the definition, a totally neutral series of numbers can be personal data, like a cookie ID, just because it links back to you. And by collecting this information, you can actually say something about an individual, and that creates a really big privacy risk in this context. How do we think about SSI in this SSI model in the context of data privacy? Because initially GDPR was thought about in the context of traditional centralized identity management system, and it was meant to mitigate for the exact abuse of power we were talking about at the beginning of the presentation. So GDPR is actually has this principles it operates, and actually self-sovereign identity comes and solves many of GDPR problems with the centralized identity systems, because you are now in control of your personal data. You choose to interact, to give consent to interact with every person in the ecosystem. You have a selective control over your credentials, and the information is much more accurate because it's easy. The information belongs to you, and you can update it. And also, credentials can be updated or revoked, and you no longer have this identity scattered on the internet, and this can be really helpful from security point of view, and confidentiality, and lots of different problems that GDPR tried to solve. The one thing that you should really keep in mind, that GDPR is actually was first introduced in 2012. It took years for them to negotiate the law, and it actually came into effect in 2018, but it's outdated because it keeps in mind this centralized model of identity, and we did not think about blockchain and self-sovereign identity at the time GDPR was adopted. And of course, this creates many mismatches between self-sovereign identity model and GDPR model. And we can actually say that self-sovereign identity is compliant with GDPR in spirit, but not on some issues is not literally compliant. Let's quickly enumerate and some of these issues where there's a mismatch between the models. For example, it's really important when you talk about processing personal data and from the GDPR model, you need to instantly define who is the data controller, who is the data processor, who is the data subject. This is essential because the identification of these roles will tell you who is responsible for what. So in the blockchain sphere, you can't really tell who is a data controller, who determines the processing, the means of processing, and the purpose of processing personal data. Because in decentralized systems, you have, we know that we are talking about miners that collaborate with the system. You are talking about addresses, wallets, and all these different endpoints, and it's really hard to define who is who. And many people have thought about this. We are beginning to analyze this in the context of self-sovereign identity, and hopefully we will reach preliminary conclusion, at least about who's accountable for what. There are many other issues, for example, personal data storage in a decentralized way. Lots of solutions use external public databases like IPFS, interplanetary file system, to store data. Of course, it's not on the blockchain, it's on the IPFS. But one problem with the IPFS is that it's public, and virtually and in theory, everyone could own indefinitely a copy of that data. Even if the data is encrypted data, it's still personal data. And we don't actually know the technology changes. We will see in the future that maybe will permit a bad actor to decrypt that data. So that is one problem. We have to choose our oppressor, a more decentralized but privacy-friendly way, or a centralized but old model of seeing identity. One of the important things with self-sovereign identity is how do you communicate with your users, because GDPR really tells you that it's really important that your data subjects to be informed, and there is a complete transparency in every aspect of how you use that personal data. And because there are so many legal technical aspects to this new technology, it will be crucial to go out of our way to explain to users why it's important that they what do they do with those keys, why it's important to keep safe the seed phrase, what happens if they lose the key, how can they recover their identity, because we are talking about serious data here. It's you could lose your credentials if you are not informed in the first place about this new technology. And that brings me to the closing remark. SSI is a tool, and it's going to be as good as the people who use it, because we will still have traditional interactions between us and the service providers. Because, for example, if you interact with the bank and you share some credentials, that bank will be obliged by the law to keep that information about you. You cannot disclose on a one-time access some credentials to your bank and then they delete the information. No, they have to keep it. So based on the use cases you think about when you talk about this SSI model, on every use case, it's a different story, it's a different compliance. We will think about privacy in a specific use case way. So yeah, that is one takeaway, that there are no pre-made rules. We have to manage to discover it on a case-by-case basis. Yeah. So thank you for listening, and I'll now give it back to Nicole.
Flavia, thank you so much for your presentation. I see that there are no questions for you yet, but I'm sure they'll keep. Cool. Gino's popped one in. We'll get to it towards the end. And yeah, I echo Tony's comment. Your presentation was extremely interesting. So thank you for sharing. Yeah, I think we can hand over to Ellie to share her screen.
I should probably start by unmuting myself. Hello, everyone. My name is Ellie Stevens. I work in Berlin from a company called Jolocom, and apologies if I talk complete and utter nonsense at any point. I'm just coming out of a cold, so I'm a bit fragile still in that state. But yeah, I work for Jolocom. It's actually spelled Jolocom, and we are a self-sovereign identity management company. So we provide a user-facing smart wallet, as well as the technology stack that underlies it and the protocol at the very base layer. So I actually came into this entire field from a totally different angle, not intending to work with blockchain technology or anything of the like, but I actually worked in Johannesburg for a company called Civicus, and they are an international network of activists and civil society organizations all across the world. And I was focused specifically on a privacy project. And in that project, you know, it really got me thinking a lot about the ways our personal data is managed and shared. And, you know, I'm not a Chinese dissident effectively looking to organize a protest, but I am a American who would like perhaps not to have my Facebook results influence, you know, my elections. So it really does touch everyone, and that's why I ended up working for a company like Jolocom, working for Jolocom specifically, because this to me is just such a big issue. And self-sovereign identity seems not just like a good stopgap, like a password manager might be today, but as an inevitable solution, and one that I really certainly hope gains ground, regardless of the many legal challenges that Flavia just outlined, which we definitely face on a day-to-day when we talk about the tech. But yeah, I will dive in, and you'll notice that my first couple slides look an awful lot like Flavia's, because we talk a lot about the current models of centralized identity, and the challenges with those, for me, which come down to usability and privacy. And so if you're looking beyond, you know, election tampering or data theft, hacker honeypots, these kinds of issues that we see every single day, Cambridge Analytica, and we just talk about like interacting online, we think about the amount of accounts we have, it's really just too unmanageable. I have 184. If you guys want to take a look, I don't know if you have any password managers that you're using now that count this for you, which you should, by the way. Or if you just know off the top of your head, let me know in the chat if you have more than 184, and you will win a prize. But unfortunately, the prize is only my deepest sympathies, because that's just really too many passwords to manage. And so what do most of us do? Use these federated identity providers, Facebook, log in with Google, but when we do this, we end up sharing all of our data. We don't know where it goes. We don't take the time to read Instagrams for our privacy policy, and so we don't know who they're selling the data to, and who these third-party providers are. We end up just needing to get a verified email address to Facebook, end up giving them access to our entire contact list, and everything we've ever done in our lives. And this is really, really scary, the amount of power that this kind of data and metadata really gives these companies, and we've obviously seen what they do with it. So Jolocom, as a self-sovereign identity provider, we think that we found a nifty solution for this, which would enable you to, as an individual, manage all of your own personal data just from the safety and security of your smartphone. This means that when you want to log in with a car sharing app, you can be instantly validated if you have your verified driver's license on your phone. And as Flavia also mentioned, you only have to share the fact that you have a validated driver's license, not that you all of your personal data that comes with it. So this minimizes the amount of information that you're required to share, maximizes your security, and makes for an all-around more seamless process. And so these are there are principles. I thought it was really interesting to see the slide that Flavia, you showed on the principles for GDPR, because these are the 10 principles that we kind of, as a community of self-sovereign identity practitioners, generally abide by. They were originally drafted by a long-standing self-sovereign identity evangelist. His name is Christopher Allen. He wrote a blog way back when called Life with Alacrity. You should check it out. It's very interesting, but it tackles kind of more in-depth what these principles really mean. Minimization I just touched on, so really only sharing with services the information that they need to be able to give you verified access. Portability, that's another great one. So being able to have your identity on you at all times, control, putting that back in the hands of the user. Interoperability is a really big one, especially for us right now, and we're actually working on quite a few projects that touch on interoperability. But effectively, the challenge that a lot of centralized providers have now is that because they don't share data, I mean, why would they? Data is power. They make their money that way. We end up going to websites and we see a long list of login options. Login with Facebook, Google, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, like blah, 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 goes on. What we as a self-sovereign identity community would like to see is one button that just says log in with your self-sovereign identity, and it does not matter if you're using Jolocom, if you're using Uport, Civic, Self-Key, any of our competitors, but you would be able to just log in seamlessly that way and not have to worry about this fierce infighting. We call this a cooperative model. Rather than a competitive one. So we think that this is going to be hugely important in the future. And this is the only technical slide I'll show, I promise. But this is what it looks like in the back end. And this is always kind of what I say really separates us from something as simple as a password manager, which beyond the fact that it doesn't actually allow you to store your verified credentials like IDs, driver's license, passport, these kinds of things, and only allows you to store self-signed credentials like your email addresses, usernames, passwords. This is really what sets us apart, and this is where you can see how blockchain technology comes into play. So we use IPFS, which Flavia mentioned, to store only the public keys. So your public key is really just a long hashed cryptographic key. It just is literally a series of numbers and letters. And your private key is stored exclusively with you on your phone. And we use Ethereum to be able to fetch the public key information and kind of unlock that so you can see it for yourself. That's a very crude explanation, and I'm happy to go into more detail about exactly how this works in this slide, if anyone would like to know. But effectively what this does, and what it looks like from the user side of view, is that it just allows you to see on your phone, you have an application that you can open, and that allows you, sorry, this is very poor quality, but allows you to input things like your name. You can store any credential here you want. You can share your credentials with an issuer or a validator. Sorry, the terminology gets wonky between the legal and the practical. Yeah, and then you can use that to access services immediately while not having to jeopardize the safety and security of your information. And where is this in use now? Because that's usually what people want to know. We have had a few super interesting proof of concepts and one active pilot that are really exciting for us. So this was the first one that included earlier this year. This is what we call blockchain on the move, but the city of Antwerp, the government of Flanders, wanted to implement a self-sovereign identity solution for both municipal employees and citizens, where you can actually, as a municipal employee, receive a self-signed credential that is your Antwerpen.bo, the email address they use on the government side, and use that to be able to verify yourself and access the back end of the municipal website. And with this, you could then meet with a citizen in person, and this is where the in-person verification for something like a passport or ID would be necessary. Meet with them in person, verify their credentials, issue them a digital credential for their state identification card that they can just keep on their phone, and then they were able to use that credential, the citizens, to register for university and to access a swimming pool. This proof of concept ended earlier this year, and there's plans to take forward. There were, obviously, as with any proof of concept, some interesting unforeseen hurdles along the way. For example, like issuing the verified credential in the first place, and how to ensure the legitimacy of that, and then how the backup mechanisms that Flavia mentioned as well. Social key recovery and key recovery, seed phrase recovery were not yet available at that time. So those are things currently available now, which are very exciting. And one of the reasons why we were able to launch, let me switch my screen, launch, a e-mobility project with Deutsche Telekom Innovation Labs, the T-Labs based here. So it was actually a huge, what they call eco structure. So quite a few blockchain companies all came together and said, how can we actually make this work? How can we actually make this work for people? And how can we make it fun? Because the problem that we have a lot of times, I mean, me as a communications practitioner, I definitely know, is that this is really difficult to explain to people, and it's really difficult to get them excited about it. Because if the first question they ask is, where can I use it now? And the answer is nowhere. They lose interest and they're going to have to move on. So it was really exciting for us to be able to see something that dealt directly with users and that wasn't focused on machine identity, because that's an entire other aspect of this that even my knowledge of is a bit tricky at some points. But I have a quick video to just give you a brief overview of what the ExRide project actually looked like, and I'll explain it in some more detail afterwards.
Ellie, you might be on mute.
Muting is difficult to remember.
You're back. That's all that matters.
New share. Oh, sorry. Stop sharing my screen. Hold on just a second. My share is not working well. But yes, so ExRide is a super interesting project for us because it has both a really fun usability aspect to it. So for users, it means that you don't have to store. We went to the launch actually just 2 weeks ago, and one of the participants has 30 different mobility apps on his phone from all of the different cities that he operates in. Whether it be transitioning from like a Lime scooter to a jump bike or a Drive Now or Uber, whatever have you. And every time you go through this, he said that he registered his wife for 5 of the applications that he uses and likes the most. And it took him 2.5 hours to get his wife completely registered for all of these things. We like to imagine a world in which you could simply use a self-sovereign identity single sign-in and just be able to transfer your credentials instantly after you go through the initial verification process. So the way that it works in ExRide is that users use the Jolocom smart wallet. They also have the ExRide application on their phone, which is the name of the scooter sharing company. They are verified in person by Bundesdruckerei here in Germany. That is the company that makes all of the German state identification cards. There is on the scooter a Raspberry Pi device, inside of which there is a piece of Ritalin code hardware encoded with Jolocom software to give the machine itself a self-sovereign identity. And this also applies to the charging stations. So users can now swap their own batteries instead of having the juicers come around every night. The juicers being the ones that show up on these big trucks and like haul around new batteries to plug into the scooters and move them around and things like that. So overall, it cuts down on corporate costs as well as user costs. It creates a landscape where instant user onboarding and verification is possible, and also reduces the cost for charging overall for companies that have to pay for these juicers. So it's a really interesting project, and I definitely invite everyone to look it up and find more about it. They can do so. We have everything. Oh man, this is not working. Oh, to the front. Sorry, folks. I think the screen is being shared now, but you can go to stories at jolocom.com and under SSI Use Cases, that's where you can find all of the use cases we are currently and have worked on. You can also find demos where you can walk through yourself and test drive your self-sovereign identity, including the one for the blockchain on the Move project that I just outlined. I was going to run through that, but may not have time. This is the entrance to the swimming pool, for example. And the wallet is fully ready now. So if you lose your phone, you can still recover your seeds. These are big questions you'll have to answer. Do people like managing their keys? No, not really. I mean, that was the first thing I did when I got my Ethereum wallet, was I wrote it down on a piece of paper, the 12 words that you're supposed to remember, and then I lost it. So that was fun. These are still the kinds of issues that we're working out, but I like to think it's a good start. And lest I ramble, I will end there and hand it back over to you, Nicole.
Oh, I wanted to say, Ellie, before you stop sharing, feel free to share if you have one more slide, because we're still good on time. But
But the only slide that I still have left is just for contact details.
okay. No, I thought I just caught you saying that you're worried about time. But I'm happy to give you a couple of minutes.
No, unless it would be interesting to walk through a demo, but otherwise that's it, and I'm happy to open up for questions as well.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you for your presentation. I see that we've got some questions. Gino, are you still on the call with us? Hi, Gino. Maybe Gino's shy. I will read his question. So the first question
Apologies.
is for Flavia, but I suppose it could be for both Flavia and Elizabeth. And the question is biometric data of people included in the SSI model, or is biometrics data too personal?
Yes, so it's really important to understand that nothing is per se included in the SSI model. SSI is just another identity management system, and you can store credentials about everything you want in your wallet. So yes, it could actually store biometric data if you wanted to store biometric data. So this is why, because it's a neutral system, and we will use it for whatever we will need to use it. So yeah, we have to make sure it's really secure, um, and maybe it's actually better to keep our biometric data in our digital wallets than to share them with service providers in a centralized way and lose control of it.
Thanks, Flavia. Ellie, any notes to add on to that?
No, biometrics are a really tricky one. They're apparently very easily hacked. Storing them on a blockchain seems also like a risk to me, but I don't know enough about blockchain, about biometric technology to be able to give a better answer than that.
And then, I don't know, Gino, would you like to ask your second question? Nope. And then, Ellie, this one is for you. How secure are these identity smart wallets on your phone? If your phone is hacked, is the data in the smart wallet safe?
So the data in the smart wallet is safe. If your phone is hacked and they have access to your seed phrase, then you're screwed. I mean, it's like losing your wallet. That sucks. So that's obviously an issue, but not really one that can be hugely mitigated just by digitizing your wallet. Of course, the benefit is that you can recover it. If you lose your phone, for example, you can recover the data better if you have your seed phrase still, because then you just have to get a new phone and then you're able to re-upload all of your, or not upload, but re-access all of your data from your new phone using your seed phrase. There's also social key recovery in the case that you lose your seed phrase, which is we are implementing now, where effectively you take your pieces of your login credentials to your smart wallet, you divide them up, give them to 5 friends, and then of those 5 friends, you have to go make physical contact with 3 of them and actually like scan the QR code on their phone to give you back a piece of your private key, and that way you can recover even if you've lost your seed phrase. So that's exciting. But yeah, the data is still safe.
Thanks, Ellie. And then the second last question is from Tony. He says, hi, Elizabeth. Having a verified driver's license on your phone makes sense. The $1 million question is, how do you get a verified driver's license on your phone? What entity will issue this?
So in our case, it was the Bundesdruckerei, so the folks that are actually working on, that actually make the ID cards here and the driver's license here. They were part of this consortium and are hugely excited about self-sovereign identity and its potential. It's been kind of interesting for us because a lot of times the SSI cool kids joke that we're focused way too much on these kind of archaic forms of identification like passports and IDs anyways, but whereas the primary use case for these won't actually be state issued institutions, but the ones that we use every day, our login credentials to get into our email, that kind of stuff, to be able to buy things on Amazon will be the more common ones. Having an e-commerce site with a self-sovereign identity login would be awesome. But it's been interesting from our side to see the interest of governments, because one of the things that we've noticed is that some of these governments that haven't even fully digitized yet, are like skipping the digitization phase and just jumping straight to the decentralization phase. That's actually what happened with the case in Antwerp. So they were debating between digitalization or decentralization and decided to try it out. And we're hoping that it takes on more, but of course it will be still up to the state itself to decide whether or not that kind of credential will be accepted. But as Flavia pointed out, the Asaph project, which Jolocom is actually an advisor to, is kind of proof, I think, that that is something that states are considering actively for the near future.
If I can add just a little bit to strengthen what you said, not only the states are interested, but there may be some use cases where actually the verifier does not accept credentials except if they are issued by a state authority. Because if we go back to the example with a user interacting with an institution like a bank or any financial institution, they will not trust you saying you are a citizen of that country or have this income, or so they will actually need to trust the credential being issued by an authority. So we will see lots of these use cases in the future of SSI, in my opinion.
I think before I go to Tony's question, I think it's Hillary. I don't know if this is tongue in cheek, but good for you to know either way, Elizabeth. Hillary wants to know if there are any vacancies at Jolocom available.
Yeah, just send me an email for sure.
Nice. From Tony, he asks, is the Internet of People project addressing SSI? I don't know. Ellie, did you touch on the Internet of People?
I'm not sure.
One sec. Let me just check if Tony's still on the call. Tony, maybe unmute your mic and let us know.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a project that's floating around, an open source project called Internet of People. And it seems to be doing a similar kind of thing. I just wondered if either the speakers were aware of it.
I cannot say that I am.
Maybe tell us about it. That's a good way to start a conversation. Tony, would you like to share what the Internet of People is about?
I know very little. I was reading about it last night, in fact.
Oh, no worries. Share what you know.
It seemed to be the same kind of thing, sovereign identity, where you could have a single point, that you become the center of the security as opposed to being on the outside. And it was just coincidental that your presentations today were talking about a very similar thing. So for me, it was great. It was the presenters presented in a better way than the white paper that I was trying to read. But it seemed to be the same. I just wondered.
Okay, well, I will definitely be looking into the project, and yeah, I definitely think that having presentations like this it's much more fun and engaging than reading a white paper. But kudos to you for reading one.
Thanks.
I think that comes to the end of our session. I just want to say thank you to both of our speakers, both Ellie and Flavia. It was wonderful, to pull you in after meeting you in person only a month ago. I visited Berlin, as I mentioned, for some work-related conferences, and became familiar with the Jolocom project after, I would say, April, early May. And Ellie's been just absolutely amazing with sharing her insights and doing a quick collaboration with Molecule in Berlin as well. So thank you for speaking, Ellie. It was nice to get another background presentation and a recap on the cool things that you guys are doing over there. And then, I think it was also great to combine how we think about SSI. I keep adding an extra S, and data privacy with a legal perspective. For those of you, I've got some messages in my DM. For those of you who would like to get in touch with Flavia, she has added her contact details on her presentation, but feel free to reach out with me. I'd be happy to coordinate some introductions. Yeah, maximize your time with our speakers. Both Flavia and Ellie have a wealth of knowledge. We have a few minutes left. We normally go until 7 minutes, 10 minutes past 7. And I see that we've got all 24 of you here. So yeah, if you had any comments or questions for our speakers, I'd like to open up the floor for an open discussion. Thanks again, guys, for joining as well.
I have a question. Is anyone on the call working on an SSI project or use case or wallet or anything like that?
Hi there, can you hear me? Hi, I'm Matt. I'm in Berlin working at a company called Authentic. And we're kind of in the SSI, or maybe more accurately, digital identity space. Mm-hmm. We basically have multiple products that we previously built everything on top of another blockchain solution, but now we've been looking more into the sort of sovereign space, seeing what everyone is doing there. Yeah, that's currently the situation. I think we have like a mobile CK and a web-based product, as well as a standalone application. And the kind of space that we're in at the moment is, I guess, somewhere between, the IDV, so like the identity verification products, similar to like OnFido, Jumio.
Right.
And then also kind of trying to bridge the gap more towards what you, Ellie, at Jolocom, as well as the likes of Yoti are doing.
Mm-hmm. Okay, super interesting.
Yeah, it is a really interesting space because there's obviously the sort of more traditional old school white label way that you can solve problems around identity, and obviously tying it to driver's licenses, etc. And then there's a lot of, it's unfair to call it utopian thinking, but even those 10 principles, they're idealistic in their nature.
Yeah.
So I think it's always about trying to find the balance that works here. And then, of course, there's also really interesting, Flavia, you were touching on, like, what is identity? And I think it's the most easy or maybe sensible solution to use existing forms of identity, like identity documents, because, of course, any business is going to follow the money if we want to prove identity for KYC processes or age. That's the most obvious route to go, I guess. But there are a lot of really interesting papers that are looking at identity in a more intersectional sort of way, or identity that can be verified by your friends. So that sort of line of thinking is also very interesting. But yeah.
Yeah, I was introduced to a very interesting community project whose name is, of course, eluding me, in international development space, where they use self-sovereign identity in very small communities and villages, where verification could be done by, a maximum of 10 villagers, because this was a village of 100 people. And you could use that as an actual credential to be able to go and make purchases and access various services in this community. So it's really interesting to see how SSI can work in such different ways depending on scale.
Yeah, completely.
And Tony's question makes me think of are there any SSI standards that will allow interoperability between different SSI offerings? The Universal Resolver is one, by the DIF, the Decentralized Identity Foundation. So they actually just launched a DID working group. Sorry, the W3C just launched a DID working group. The DIF has the universal resolver that allows you to create a driver, and with that driver, you can achieve interoperability with SSI. I can write that down.
Thanks, Ellie. And then I know, Craig, you've got a question or some comments as well? Craig Voss?
Sorry, just trying to unmute. I just wanted to confirm, did you say genome from that Authentic project?
No, I didn't. What is genome?
No, when I was doing my course through BlockGeeks, there was a young girl that built basically an application, or she was working on an application called Genome, where basically they were mapping people's DNA, and they were using it in it's almost like a global database where people could, get sort of aspects of the different people, and they could use it for healthcare to sort of, it's very, very intense, but it basically ends up being a global database of health records, which would actually be quite cool for something for Molecule. But yeah, it's something I'll have to share with you guys and send you links and stuff too.
Okay. Well, thanks, Craig.
Cool.
Okay. Unless we have any other questions, I don't see any more popping up or any that I've missed. Just double checking. No. All right. Thank you for the third time. Thanks everybody for joining.
Thanks very much, Nicole.
And Elizabeth for being our speakers. I will post the recording on social media, so keep an eye on our Facebook, YouTube, as well as Twitter. Twitter being the easiest touch point. So yeah, I'll hope to post that between tomorrow and Thursday. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you next month.
Thank you.
Bye.